Great. Great.
Okay, hold on. Let me find my questions. They're in, oh, here it is. So I guess, so I have about 10 questions, and I'm wondering how much time you have, because I don't know if this is too much, and I want to edit these if based on the amount of time that you feel like you have the energy for this after. Yeah, after.
Sure. Well, I'm good for an hour.
Okay.
But I would need to finish in an hour.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
And may I ask? I'm sure you told me, but to what end are you asking these questions? Are you going to write something or produce something, or is it just for your self-interest? Just remind me. Sorry.
Yeah, no, so I'm a PhD student
That's
here.
right. Yes.
And I am writing my dissertation on mushroom spirits.
Mm.
Yeah. So, and that started with, so I read Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life around this time last year. And he was writing about the cordyceps mushroom and how it like sends out these spores that land on the ant's back, and then it creates this mind virus that's controlling ant behavior to serve the mushroom.
Yeah.
And I found that really fascinating in that I feel as if mushrooms may also be controlling human behavior to some extent. And, it was Terrance McKenna in the Archaic Revival. He wrote about this, what he called an exopheromone that interacts with the human's brain, which none of this is quite linear or scientific at this point. But I think that there's something going on here. And I'm trying to dive into this idea of a mushroom spirit and figure out if we were to sort of pull together all of the mushroom people's ideas on mushroom spirits, and if we were to do integration sessions with people who have had extensive experience with mushrooms, can we make some sort of, I guess, can we personify the mushroom spirit, and what would it look like? Are there any similarities or parallels? So that's kind of the scope of the research, which I feel like it's a little airy at this point. I haven't quite grounded it all, but I hope I write my concept paper in the fall, which is my proposal for my dissertation. And I hope that by then I have a better sort of, that feels more grounded, I guess I may say.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So my first question is, where, how, why did your fascination with mushrooms begin? Because you wrote a whole book on the history of the magic mushroom. So how did this start in your life?
Well, that's a good question. I first heard about magic mushrooms when I was at school, and I went to boarding school, and someone in one of the houses had allegedly found a load of magic mushrooms on the playing fields and eaten them and gone crazy and smeared jam on the ceiling. And I don't know if a word of that is true. So that's how I remember it, but I don't know if it happened. And I remember saying at the time, well, I want nothing to do with that. And then I had a horrible time at boarding school. And in 1985, I mean, I don't want to get too bogged down in the detail of this, but I don't know if you've heard of the Battle of the Beanfield. So there used to be a free festival at Stonehenge for 10 years. Every summer solstice, people would rock up at Stonehenge, just put on a festival. And at its height in 1984, I think 30,000 people would go. Imagine that, a free festival, total anarchy. And yet somehow it worked. And in 1985, the government put a stop to it, and a convoy of people living in trucks tried to get to it. They were trashed by the police, absolute travesty of justice. There's a documentary you can find called Operation Solstice on YouTube. It's horrible. and they limped back to Savernake Forest, which was right by my school. And then on the solstice eve, they drove off again to try and celebrate it somewhere else. And I remember standing on the side of the road, watching them go past, and part of me being frightened and part of me going, take me with you. I want to come with you. This is the thing. And so that was kind of my moment where I thought, I want to step outside of mainstream culture and, for want of a better word, become a hippie. And then when I got to university and escaped, you know, the confines of the world I'd grown up in and my schooling, I discovered hippies. I joined the very first university pagan society, and they were all free festival types. And, you know, they taught me how to roll a joint and taught me how to identify mushrooms. And I had my first trip when I was 19, first mushroom trip. So I both discovered psychedelics in that kind of milieu of this is part of the counterculture, and in the university library I found a few books on mushrooms. There was Roger Himes, if my French pronunciation is any good, Roger Himes' book Les champignons hallucinogènes, which I couldn't read a word of because I don't speak French, and Persephone's Quest by Gordon Wasson. And I just put two and two together, and I just thought, I want to write a book about this. So even then, when I was 19, and it took, you know, till I was in my 30s to do it.
It's so good.
It was just, yeah, just a moment of, gosh, you can write about this stuff. I want to write about this stuff. And my first trip was with two friends in the basement flat, very much in that hippie context of, it wasn't about mushroom spirits or indigeneity. It was about liberating one's mind from the man. And yet in that experience, I had a conker, horse chestnut seed, and I was just looking at it and marveling at its aliveness and seeing its aliveness. So already there was something about connection with the non-human there. And then half of me was going, this is really weird. This is so fucking weird. This is really, really, really fucking weird. This is weird. And the other half of me was going, this is so familiar. I know this. Well, that's kind of weird. It's weird, but I know this. And there's something about that enigma, that riddle of never having encountered anything so strange, and yet somehow feeling like I already knew it. That was the kind of thing that propelled me forward, because God knows I've had my fair share of absolutely horrendous trips. I mean, just horrendous. Parties busted by the police, encounters with army helicopters, you name it, I've done it. I could write the book on how not to trip.
Maybe you should. That would be great.
But, you know, there's something about it. Why does it open your eyes to the non-human, and particularly the plants? Why does it come with this particular ambience that's weird and strange all at the same time, and enchanted and elfin? And yeah, I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah, that helps. That gives me an orientation of your history there. I think it's always really interesting to see how people did become acquainted with these substances. Like, what was your path into this unknown world?
Right. Okay, can I just say that the motivation for writing the book, I eventually encountered a scholar called Ronald Hutton, who was a huge influence on me, who's written most of the kind of modern history of modern paganism. And so he was a profound influence. And it just started annoying me that every time I picked up a book on psychedelics, it would repeat the history. It would say the same things: Gordon Wasson, Tim Leary, Albert Hoffman's bicycle ride, you know, and it became like a kind of, no one felt they could write about psychedelics without repeating the myth. And I went, well, in a Huttonian way, how much of this is actually true? What happens if we go back and test this? Because I don't think there's anything antithetical between being into psychedelics and being critical. And part of the reason for writing the book was wanting to demonstrate to the world that you can be into psychedelics and you don't lose your critical faculties, that you can be a functioning member of the intelligentsia or intellectual life and not just be, a caricatured idiotic hippie, or whatever it is. Because people who use mushrooms, I mean, it's changing now, but for a long time you were regarded as childish or infantile or escapist, not belonging to the real world. And so it was I'm not, it's very, my own personal experiences are implicit within the book. I'm never explicit about it, but I think they're, reading between the lines is pretty obvious. That was my hope. But it was just, look, here it is. You don't have to give up intellectual rigor just because you're into psychedelics.
I would agree. And there still is a really big clash. And it makes me curious about what's happening over in Europe and the UK versus the United States. And that, even though this movement is happening sort of worldwide, which is my next question, like, what do you think is happening with this current shroom boom, as I call it? Because here in the States, I mean, people are obsessed with mushrooms. It's the Amanita is all over, it's become like a pop culture icon in a way beyond the realm of like fairies, paganism, and Alice in Wonderland. Like everyone is obsessed with mushrooms over here right now.
Wow.
But there's still a really disjointed sort of unacceptance around people that engage and use a lot of psychedelics. I'm still labeled by it, but like as a kind of a druggie by a lot of people, and I'm fully sober except for psychedelic use, but still somehow that's a part of who I am to a lot of people. So
well, I'd love to hear, maybe if you can point me to any people who are talking about fly agaric, Amanita. I'd love to hear about that, but that's another thing. Well, I mean, it's a bit hard for me to comment because I'm getting all my information about what's happening in the US secondhand. But it's just that everything that has happened is being driven by the science, right? So I think particularly what was done at Johns Hopkins and also Imperial College, and then Michael Pollan's book, I think hugely important, has driven this relaxation of the law, and that's what's enabling this conversation to even be happening. We're way behind here in Britain. It's not the same. There's people are sort of starting to move towards thinking about how could we have a psychedelic assisted therapy, but it's happening in the States already, right? But it seems to me that the dominant discourse is very much about therapy, and that's interesting. Not entirely unproblematic. And I know big business is getting involved, and all the same problems are about to obtain. But I mean, I'm always interested in whose voices don't get heard, who are the marginalized. And obviously it's been the indigenous voices, women, people of color, queer voices, and so on and so forth. Where are they, and what will happen if we move to a point where the clinic is the legitimate context for taking psychedelics? Where does that leave 19-year-old me, who I wouldn't change anything, who needed to go and trip at parties that were busted by the police and encounter army helicopters and things like that? And that's a very different kind of psychedelia to this rather new age obsessive concern with minimizing risk, uh,
Yeah.
uh, individualistic view that's all about the individual and the self. Ironically, this drug that is supposed to lead us to transcend the self is becoming more and more about the self. For me, the interesting thing is our relationship with the other than human. That's far more of interest. Yeah, though of course, I mean, if these substances really have the potential to cure people, I mean, I'm all for it. Of course, absolutely. Who could be against that? It's just I would hate to see the closing down of other ways of thinking about what this experience means.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a big problem. You mentioned a variety of the major concerns about what's happening, and I agree with all of those. I'm going to keep moving through the questions.
Sure.
I would like to go deeper into some of your answers, just because I want to get some of these that are really important to my kind of research question. We're kind of moving a little deeper into this idea of a mushroom spirit, which is, do you think that mushrooms have consciousness? And if so, are you one of the people who can communicate with mushrooms? And if not, what do you think of people talking to mushrooms? Because I'm sure in your circles, which I've listened to quite a few podcasts that you've been on, and I've read your book, and you're really into druidry and sort of the ancient pagan thing going on over there. And I feel like you may know some people who communicate with mushrooms if you don't yourself.
Well, I mean, the honest answer is I don't know. I don't know whether mushroom spirits are as they appear to be, or whether they are fabrications of the drug-addled mind, or projections of the self, or so I really don't know, and I keep an open mind, and I'm not sure that question is answerable, because the materialists will just tell you that it's all psychology, and the more animistically inclined people will tell you no, they're out there. And so we're just arguing round in circles. I suppose the more interesting question is, does what they have to say, is it of interest? We're under, of course, no obligation to act under what we hear during a psychedelic encounter. So I find panpsychism very persuasive, and I'm an animist, which means I see the world as full of people, only some of whom are human. And so mushrooms do what mushrooms do, fungi do what fungi do. Whether they have consciousness in any shape or form that we can recognize, I really don't know. But I'm willing to, more than willing. I think it's narcissistic and anthropocentric to think that consciousness only exists in human form or comes in human form. I am quite sure there is some experience to being a tree. There's some experience to being a fungus. It's obviously non-linguistic, but yeah, there is some interiority going on there. So the question is, what happens when you take a high dose of psilocybin and you have this encounter with mushroom spirits? And I mean, it's the mystery, right? I don't know.
It is a mystery.
I really don't know.
Yeah.
I don't take mushrooms very often these days because I just have so little opportunity. So this was a long time ago. But I did have a mushroom spirit encounter, and they said two things to me. They said, "We've always been with you." And I said, "What do you want?" And they said, "Your mind." And it was so terrifying. I had to open my eyes and, oh, Jesus Christ, you can't have it.
They said
I want my mind.
they said they wanted your mind.
Yes.
Wow.
That I said, what do you want? Your mind was the answer.
That's fascinating. So maybe
Yeah.
it is some sort of mind virus that they are.
But then bear in mind, you know, I am absolutely steeped in Terrance McKenna, and I
Yeah.
know vast tracks of his works verbatim. You know, I've listened to his talks over and over again. So it would be easy to interpret that as, well, that's just your mind rearranging all this stuff you've read about Terrance McKenna and convincingly coming up with another voice. I mean, so I'm absolutely, I'm sitting on the fence. I'm very happy to sit in that place of not knowing. All I know is that I had this experience. It was really scary. I didn't want to relinquish my mind. But when they said we've always been with you, that felt like a blessing, like some kind of benediction. But what it means, I don't know.
That's pretty incredible. You know, the idea that it is somehow these projections of the self, like I feel like that might be a really clear sort of rabbit hole to follow on, and in collecting these sort of accounts through how many people I can get through this process with, you know, will that be the case?
Well, you see, I'm not convinced that the self is a unitary thing.
Yeah.
I think the self is actually multiple, and therefore it's quite conceivable that there are different parts to me. I mean, I know there are. I mean, just in a sort of very prosaic way, there's a part of me that might desire something, and another part of me that says it would be very bad for you to have that. So there's two different parts of me there, right? But so I'm a songwriter as well, and sometimes I write songs, but it's not, I don't feel like it's me writing them. Something comes through. That's the feeling of this, like a download. Well, maybe I'm genuinely encountering something other outside of myself, or maybe I'm encountering something that's outside the normal fiction of I, that is still just some part of me that is able to write songs and uncensored songs. And I don't have the answer to that. I want to live in a world where I have a genuine encounter with something other, but I'm prepared to accept that maybe that's not the case. But in which case that makes the self a true, even more remarkable thing, right? If there can be these parts of ourselves that are so hidden from us that they can say things like, I've always been with you and I want your mind. And yeah, so it's no less remarkable. But constitutionally, I want to live in an enchanted world where there are mushroom spirits and where you can talk to trees and where you can, you know, receive songs from the great mystery.
Do you believe in sort of the ideas of things like the collective unconscious and anima mundi, and sort of these depth psychological Jungian concepts?
I've had my Jungian phase a long time ago, but I'm not a huge fan. I don't know. I think it's my issue is not so much with Jung; it's with the Jungians who always present Jung as just, it's a done deal, it's a fait accompli. There's your answer, and that bothers me. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
So no, it's not a discourse that works for me. No, I've had my Jungian phase.
I'm in my Jungian phase right now, but
Okay.
I hope that I'm not that sort of superior and closed-minded to other information and phenomenon.
I think I do have a beef with. I have two beefs with Jung. One, I think his writing is atrocious, but I mean that's neither here nor there really. But the other is he was trying to do science when I think he was actually a magician, and I think what he was far more steeped in the Western mystery tradition than he gives credit for. And I think what he was a magician, not a scientist. So I'm very happy with Jung as a magician.
I think that I love that idea, and I will most certainly spend some more time. I would like to write a paper on Jung as a magician and explore that more. That's pretty awesome.
And here I think some of the best work that McKenna ever did were his talks on alchemy, which I think he gave at Aslan. They're not all correct. There's a few errors in there. But I think if you really want to unpack McKenna, who I also regard as a magician,
yes,
I think everything he said was steeped in the Western mystery tradition, not shamanism. I think it's erroneous, the labeling of him as a techno shaman. He was a magician. Yeah, I think that was wonderful. That's how, for me, that's where you unriddle McKenna.
McKenna does have talks on alchemy. That's what you said, right?
Yeah, he gave them at Esalen. They're available online. You can find them.
I'll have to look those up. That's great. Okay, so I'm gonna skip that question. Because we kind of already covered this. So what do you think about the phenomenon where people interacting with mushrooms get really into mushrooms? They start growing them, they become possessed by the mushroom. They also seem to always get very ecological when using mushrooms on a regular basis. They go from sort of material oriented earth to more earth-based. They often get into paganism. Like there's a phenomenon happening like this. And do you think this is a thing? Do you see this in your communities?
Anecdotally, yeah. I suppose I'm not quite as embedded in psychedelic communities as once I was, so it's a bit hard for me to make that call. I mean, I've been doing research on the use of psychedelics within contemporary Druidry, and it's still incredibly marginal. And so people who are already into paganism are actually quite suspicious of psychedelics. I think it's more that people taking psychedelics are looking for context to make sense of their experiences and are therefore reaching out towards paganism.
Maybe interesting to look at the different layers of psychedelic communities through time. And to sort of compare, like this is sort of what people are thinking, talking about it in this area, and even maybe like cross-culturally. Like I wonder if a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is a phenomenon happening here in the United States.
I think it might well be.
It
might well be. And then again, it's the $64 million question. Is this coming from the mushrooms, or is it that mushrooms are already bound up in discourses of, well, they're natural as opposed to acid, which is artificial? Now, my feeling is that it is coming from the mushrooms. That there's something about the experience that particularly opens people to the other than human world, and particularly the plant world. And I've just heard it so many times from so many different people from so many walks of life. And now there's this empirical evidence coming out of Imperial College, so I'm not fully on board with their methodologies. Yeah, you just hear it over and over again, which makes me think that there's something more to it. And in my own experiences, I mean, absolutely. I mean, my two sort of abiding experiences that I've always come back to are, one it's like I'm drawn back to some core aspect of who I am, the kernel of who I am. I might even use the word soul. And it's like every time it comes as a revelation, and every time I've forgotten because of emails and having to pay the rent and, you know, all the crap of modern living, and you forget. And then it's like, oh, and me. And it's okay. And then the other is this sense of seeing the ridiculousness of humanity. It's almost like you're being given a mushroom's eye view, you know, a mushroom anthropologist from Mars looking at humans going, you guys are just so ridiculous. Look at you. You know, you've put a little wooden fence there and you're saying, this is mine and this is not mine. Yeah. And there's this sense of being laughed at, this sense of humor, this wry humor, this leprechaun-like humor. I think I should add that nearly 99% of my mushroom experiences have been with liberty caps, and just a handful with cubensis. And they do feel different. There's a qualitative difference, which of course the Mazatec say. They say that every mushroom has a different personality or a different spirit. And so I understood where McKenna was coming from when I did take cubensis, because the visions were much more alien and Aztec and architectural, and yeah, alien is the word. Whereas liberty caps have always felt much more of the land here, much more sort of pixie-ish and yeah, leprechaun-like.
That's cool. And that is one of my questions is, what do you think there's any differences between like the tub grown mushrooms, which are obviously very easy to get, and then foraged mushrooms, and how they interact with us? And you've kind of already answered this, but I wonder if you want to elaborate more on foraging mushrooms or these not synthesized psilocybin, but the tub grown mushrooms.
I mean, I don't know really. I don't have enough experience, but it's quite clear that already in Britain, I think liberty caps are getting over harvested, and there's not enough of them to go round, and people don't harvest mindfully. So I think cultivation has to be the way forward. But you see, I'm an animist, so my argument is that, or my invitation is that we're building a relationship with a other than human person, happens to be a mushroom person. So it behoves us to build a relationship with it, whether we're growing it or whether we're foraging it. So if you're foraging it, you have to learn what time of year, what kind of field, where does it grow, how many should I take, what kind of weather would mean it's a good time to go looking. The same kind of qualities are required if you grow yourself. So I mean, I would always encourage people to grow their own rather than just buy them on the internet or down the shop. That's not a very animistic relationship. That's a relationship of, it's just a commodity, it's just a financial exchange. That's a way of seeing it, as a drug, rather than this is an actor, an agent. So animism is about the whole way we approach it, and yeah, that's the view I advocate for.
And it makes a lot of sense that it's this relationship that we would form with the earth and our environment in order to forage these mushrooms that may be valuable.
Right.
And that could have a lot of implications for the person kind of going on that type of journey versus the person who is just sort of engaging in capitalism and giving someone their money. It's like the difference between learning how to grow your own food versus growing your food in a grocery store.
Yeah,
It's a really
Yeah,
different process, you know.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So on that note, what do you think will happen when we synthesize psilocybin and turn it into a pharmaceutical? Do you think we're on the right path with what's happening in that realm?
Well, again, for reasons of supply and demand, I think synthetics have to play a role. And Eric Davis wrote a blog recently about LSD and really sort of saying LSD is rather being forgotten with all the, you know, the move towards psychedelic assisted therapy. And I was found his arguments very persuasive. Um,
Who is that again? I'm sorry.
Eric Davis,
Eric Davis. Okay.
I think he called the article was The Elephant in the Room or The Elephant LSD. And
Actually. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
and but there was a paper came out during lockdown, and I don't think it got quite the attention it deserved, but they've discovered, so it's a very Western thing, isn't it? We've identified this active ingredient, psilocybin, and now we go, oh well, it's psilocybin. So we talk about psilocybin mushrooms as if it's just this one thing that's doing it. But this paper that came out in lockdown has discovered beta carbolines in mushrooms, different beta carbolines in different species, which basically means that mushrooms are already ayahuasca in that they contain both tryptamine alkaloids and harmaline MAO inhibitors. So each one is a unique cocktail. So it's going to be different. I mean, I've never had the luxury of taking pure psilocybin, but people say it's kind of easier on the body. It's kind of cleaner. And Liberty caps can, you know, they're quite hard on the body. You can feel very, you can be sick. You can, yeah, it can be hard to move. It can bring you out in cold sweats and all that kind of stuff. So there's a place for it. There's absolutely a place for it, and I wouldn't make any judgment. It's just in an animistic worldview, you're interested in fostering right relationships with the other than human people with whom you live, and that really comes to the fore with a mushroom like the fly agaric, which is far more complicated, and you know, you've got to prepare it in the right way, and you know, that's a mushroom you seem to have to approach on bended knee. It's less forgiving, I think, than psilocybin mushrooms.
Have you done fly agaric in larger quantities? Have you ever tried that?
Only in cautious doses,
Yeah.
and it's been profound.
Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I had two really extraordinary experiences. One was I became invisible, by which I mean not, you know, Harry Potter and the invisibility cloak, not that, that people didn't notice me anymore. And I don't know if you've had this experience when you're walking, you see someone coming down the street, and already some part of you reaches out to touch whatever part of them is reaching out, because part of you is going, are they a nutter? Are they dangerous? Are they going to mug me? Are they going to attack me? Do I fancy them? Do they fancy me? All this stuff, this non-verbal communication is going on, because, and you can develop well, anyone who lives in a city develops a sensitivity to this, right? Where you notice the nutter 200 yards away so that you take a different route or whatever. Whatever that part that reaches out, I was able to hold it in, and that meant that people just didn't notice me. It was like they were sliding off me, and so I could walk within feet of people, and so it seemed to me at the time. I just wasn't there. And I thought, this is great. I know how to do this now. Hey.
Well,
But
that
I
was my
don't.
question. Was it a relief or was it scary?
Oh, oh no, it's complete relief.
Uh,
Yeah, to an introvert like myself. Yeah. The other was that the next morning I woke up with a complete story about fly agaric in my head, like complete, almost word for word. And I can see now that some of it was drawn from my own experience and from my own knowledge, but the story was completely new. And it leads me to think, though, as I say, I'm very happy in the not knowing, that whatever the thing is that we're trying to encounter, we can only encounter it through the lens of our consciousness and our conditioning and our understanding, but it's infinitely accommodating and so reveals itself in that lens. So for example, there's a baddie in the story called the Grim Gribber. Now it turns out I didn't invent that word, because I was looking through a really old diary and I suddenly realized I'd written it down, and it's a 18th century piece of slang for lawyer, a grim gribber. You know, it's
uh-huh.
somewhere I had remembered it, though even though I'd forgotten that I even knew it, and that became the baddie, was the grim gribber.
Uh,
And the mushroom presented herself. She called herself Madame Craw, and it was a story about where stories came from and how there was a time when humans didn't have any stories.
wow,
Now, yeah, download.
that's interesting.
And this was on a minuscule thumbnail sized piece of fly agaric.
I have a friend that lives up in Northern California that is going to be a part of the research, and they have a bunch of amanitas up there. And in the winter, I'm going to go foraging with him for these. And I mean, they just grow everywhere up in Northern California.
Wow.
And I've had tincture before, but I've never anything else. And I'm really excited. I feel like the Amanita is just so much more archetypal. And for the purposes of this research, like the stories you're telling me, there may be more of a spirit that perhaps comes through Madame Craw. But the problem with that is just the lack of experience for most people. Very few people have taken the Amanita.
Right. Yeah.
And there is a guy, Kevin something, that wrote, he's an anthropology professor at I think University of Washington or Western.
Kevin Feeney.
Yeah.
I've
And
got his book right here.
I have his book too, and he's a cool guy. I've talked to him before, and I'm gonna talk to him again. But the fly agaric is really cool. It sure would be cool to gather stories of Amanita experiences.
which I've been doing. Yeah, gradually on the back burner.
What do you plan to do with that?
Well, I'd like to write something eventually. It's just finding the time. That's what I'm working on at the moment, trying to liberate my time.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Okay, so two more questions. And this is kind of officially the last one, and then there's just kind of an ending question. But if the mushrooms, and I guess we're talking about psilocybin here, but if the mushrooms had a set of lessons or something, an overarching theme that you see that they're trying to teach humans, what do you think that could be? Do you think that there's anything like that personally?
Well, it's to pay attention to the non-human, to I mean, I think it is profound. They're profoundly, as I'm saying this, I'm remembering a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago of someone who's deeply concerned by capitalism getting its hands on the psychedelic scene. And so it seems to undermine everything I'm about to say, because what seems to be happening in America right now is the antithesis of what I'm saying, in terms of, you know, people wanting to turn this into a business, into a commodity, into generating capital, yada, yada, yada. My reading of the mushroom experience is that it's profoundly anti that, and that it says, look, there's a tree. I'm going to show you what a tree actually looks like, or what it's more like. This is what it's like to be a tree. Have a look, because then you can't unsee it. Once you've noticed it, it's like the ticking of a clock. You can't unnotice it. And for whatever reason, we've become increasingly dangerously narcissistic, where we only see ourselves and we only look at ourselves. We just choose to look at ourselves. Our whole modern culture is about the self. And it's saying, you're only recognizing aliveness, consciousness, when it comes in human form. But look, there's a being over there that eats light and doesn't go around fucking the planet, you know? If that's what they're saying. And if that, I'm a bit, you know, I'm an eco-pagan. Maybe I just see what I want to see. Maybe if I was a rampant capitalist, I'd just see money and opportunity in the psychedelic experience. I don't know, you know, and I can't put closure on this. But here again, the most marginalized voices are the indigenous people, the people who've actually been using these things for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And they say, of course, it's mushroom spirits. You know, they can't, it's they do the healing. It's not Maria Sabina was adamant. It's the spirits do the healing. It's not me. I just pray for them to come. So what happens if we take that worldview seriously, give it credence? Can't be any worse than the shitstorm we're in right now.
I agree with all of that. I'm really worried about the psychedelic movement, and not the psychedelic movement. I'm worried about psychedelic capitalism. And I'm a therapist, and I very much will enjoy and do enjoy integration work and helping people sort of understand and make meaning of their experiences. But I don't think that you need to have a therapist or all of this sort of control around how psychedelics are done. Some of my most meaningful experiences have been the worst experiences I've had.
Right.
And when there's so much control around how this happens, I think you eradicate the potential for underworld experiences, which are, you know, the great awe-inspiring experiences. Sure, those were also helpful, but it didn't clear the emotional debris and sort of work with this toxic shadow psychic elements like the bad unplanned trips did. And so I'm really concerned about what's happening. And that wasn't always the case. I got involved with Chacruna maybe a couple of years ago and started hearing these other voices outside of maps and sort of what's mainstream in America right now. And it made a lot of sense to me. My undergrad work is in anthropology, and this sort of indigenous perspective, I feel like, is the correct one. And it's something that we're really missing. And I think that there's going to be problems.
Mm.
I think that, you take any sort of individual element, like, you take hawthorn berry, which is a great heart medicine, but then you turn it into Lipitor with a pharmaceutical company, and you take a pure, wonderful substance and turn it into this pharmaceutical, and all of a sudden you have all these side effects that cause other disease and other issues. And I think, I hope that I'm not being overly negative, but I worry that they're going to do the same thing to the psychedelic substances.
Mm.
But I guess we'll see. I don't know. I also don't know that the psychedelic substances synthesized will truly have the same power and spirit in an adulterated form. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I guess we'll see. And I guess there will always be people who know how to interact with these substances in their original ways. My last question is if you could tell me anything about mushrooms or anything that we didn't already discuss that you feel like might be pertinent to this topic, what would it be? Or what am I missing? What am I not seeing?
Wow.
Yeah, that's a big question.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I'm just going to be repeating myself here, but if we want a radically new / very old way of being with the world, I think animism gives us a strong pointer. And what it means is we need an attitude of receptivity, which means there's humility in that. There's a humility in not knowing. And go, okay, let's assume that you have some agency in this, mushrooms. Then I need to create contexts where I can listen to that, where I can pay attention to it. And my fear with the therapy is that they're not actually creating contexts where we can listen to what the mushrooms might want to tell us. They're creating contexts in which people can very skillfully shape the direction of a trip through pre-direction, through music, through affect, touch. Let me give you one example. I met someone who'd been involved in the Imperial College depression trials. And on his first trip, he had a big dose. He met these Egyptian gods. And they said, we're gonna kill you. And he pleaded for his life. They said, oh, all right, we won't. And then they looked at each other and smiled and said, yeah, but we're going to kill you anyway. And they killed him. And he had a classic sort of death experience, and it was horrible. And he was, it was not good. The next trip, there they were again. And they said, we're going to kill you. And this time he was able to say, bring it on. Been there, done that. Well, the kind of Imperial College model would ring fence that and say, whatever that was, it's not really of interest. I mean, it may be of psychological interest. It was a classic ego dissolution experience, but actually what matters is that your depression got better. So that content is sort of irrelevant. It was clearly generated by the contents of your unconsciousness. But the fact that you got better is what matters. If you're an animist, you would come at that experience completely differently. You go, well, which gods? What were they wearing? Why those gods? What was their demeanor? Were they playful? Were they tricksy? You would read it, you would pay heed to the experience in a way that's completely different to if you're coming at this from a purely psychological model. And whilst healing people is just beautiful and so needed. It doesn't get to the bottom of the problem. So I don't know if you've seen that documentary Magic Medicine about some of the early trials at Imperial College. There's one of the volunteers is Scottish, and although he has an amazing trip, he goes back and very quickly falls into depression again. But you look at his partner who's been living with his depression for 20 years. She's depressed. They're living in a shit village in Scotland, which is depressed because there's no jobs, there's no money, there's no prospects. The weather's shit. Everything is shit about that life. You know, they're treating a brain, but that brain doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a marriage, that's part of a family, that's part of a community, that's part of a culture, and the whole culture is broken, is depressed, and I think that the key is to go, actually, until we reformulate our relationship with the non-human, until we get that right, we're just sticking band-aids over cracks. As valuable as that is, but it's not getting to the heart of the problem. And I think if there is a possibility in the mushroom experience of showing us what the real root of the problem is just going, we've forgotten how to be in the world. We've forgotten how to be with the world. There you go.
Yeah.
I didn't know I thought that until I said it. So there you go.
Well, it's beautiful. And I mean, it's very true. Like similar to just using regular antidepressants, like fixing one mind doesn't fix a broken society.
Exactly.
You know, and that's kind of the heart of the matter, is that people are generally, especially with depression and anxiety, in that state because our lives don't make sense anymore in the context of this world we live in.
And it's like that is the logical end point of this investigation. But unfortunately, the way the science is being done, that they're not willing to go any further. You know, the police tape comes out and it's just your brain. We're just, you know, allowing experiences to be integrated into the amygdala or whatever it is, you know.
It's just very true. It's just surface level, like, which is kind of I would call it the Western approach at this point, that just don't deal with root issues of anything anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I am super stoked. Yeah, I'm just really grateful that you did this evening. I know it's the end of your day. And can I have the option to reach out to you via email if I have more questions?
Of course, yes, happily.
Okay. Awesome.
Happily, yeah. Yeah, and let me know how the research goes, and
I will.
Yeah, just keep in touch.
I will. You know, at one point I had asked if you wanted to be a reader, which is, I'm not even quite sure. I know it's something we have to do. I don't know if I can recruit people from other institutions, but it's also, I think, a pretty big responsibility. And I think you're wanting to free up some of your time. So, you know, but I may, if there are sections, I may send you stuff occasionally and see if you have the time or willingness to read a few things here and there.
I would, if I have the time, I would be delighted. So perhaps we can just do it in an unofficial way.
Okay, great. Great.
Yeah.
Well, this is all beautiful. I can't wait to transcribe this and spend some time like going into some of these things you said quite deeper. You gave me a lot of really beautiful stuff to think about and sort of spin off on and see what I can find in some of these notes. So thank you.
Great. Well, it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah.
Lovely to meet you. And yeah, stay in touch.
Okay. Thank you, Andy.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.